We don't matter. More on the Brian Ferentz contract amendment in a moment. But first, I want to remind you to check out Ascent Nutrition. They're awesome products, whether we're talking about their mold and mycotoxin-free coffee, perhaps their algae oil DHA. Great benefits from all of their products, and they've got more coming out here soon. You can still get this discount. Cash in on it. 15% off by using that code Hawkeyes at checkout. And Iowa floor covering in their Tough Core Click Together 4.5 millimeter waterproof vinyl flooring. If you have flooring needs, contact the boys down at IFC or visit them online, iowafloorcovering.com/DIY. You can get this $269 per foot rate with self-installation. This is a Central Iowa company. Support local and support our sponsors, Iowa Floor Covering down in Bondurant. So yes, the news on a Monday. We knew this news was coming. I mentioned this to our listeners here from the Hawkeye of the Storm about a week ago that Iowa was working with Brian Ferentz on a revised contract. Gary Barta meeting with Brian, I believe it was a week and a half ago, if I'm not mistaken. And the details of the amendment coming out today via a press release from the University of Iowa. Let's take a look at the press release if you haven't seen it already. And we're going to kind of take this piece by piece. So let's start at the top. The press release entitled, Iowa Announces Brian Ferentz Contract Amendments. University of Iowa offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Brian Ferentz has signed an amended contract for the 2023 season with financial incentives based on designated performance objectives. The contract amendments were announced Monday by Gary Barta, Henry B. and Patricia B. Tippy, Director of Athletics Chair. The release goes on to give some more details on this contract amendment or series of amendments. The contract amendments include a salary of $850,000 effective February 1st, 2023. The designated performance objectives for the 2023 season include an average of at least 25 points per game and a minimum of 7 wins, including regular season and a possible bowl game. It continues. If designated performance objectives are met, the contract will return to the prior 2-year rolling agreement terms, along with a one-time lump sum bonus and base salary adjustment. So let's take this one piece at a time. Brian Ferentz had made about, I believe, $900,000. That was the number I found for last year. Remember, he was given a boost, as was basically everybody. Everybody was given a boost prior to the 2022 season. A bunch of raises going around. Brian did get a smaller raise comparatively when you looked at other coaches like Phil Parker, of course, and even Raymond Brathwaite, Kelton Copeland, those guys. But Brian Ferentz goes from making $900,000 in 2022 to starting on February 1st, so earlier this month, his annual salary will go to, for this year, $850,000. So you could say a $50,000 decrease in salary the 1 month removed, right? So his salary will be $850,000 for the next 11 months. According to Scott Docterman of The Athletic, his contract was set up so that he would have made $972,000 this year. So if you look at it from that perspective, you could argue that he took an over $100,000 decrease in pay. Obviously, I understand a lot of money, right? $850,000 is still a lot of money. We understand that. Now, you'll see the term, you saw the term multiple times in this release, designated performance objectives. So what were those designated performance objectives? Let's just call them DPOs. Well, one of the objectives was to get to 25 points per game. Now, I had a discussion, I've had lots of discussions on this metric, points per game, and Kirk Ferentz's obsession with points per game, Gary Barta's obsession with points per game. And I'm a firm believer, as I say every time, I have a lot of respect for Kirk Ferentz as a person. I don't know much about Gary Barta as a person, but I know a lot about Kirk Ferentz as a person. I have a lot of respect for him as a person. But as it relates to running this football program, I'm a firm believer that Kirk's obsession, his infatuation with points per game, is simply a result of having to find a statistic and a narrative that fits what Kirk needs, what Brian needs. So this is a convenient statistic that Kirk has obviously either researched himself or has been given by research from someone else. Kirk Ferentz gave the stat that Iowa's 55-3 when they score over 24 points per game. And although that is very true, and it's likely that if Iowa scores 25 points per game in 2023, they're going to win 10 or 11 games. And I think that's very possible that they do that. I don't understand the direct correlation between Iowa scoring 25 points per game and Brian Ferentz. Now, I understand that there is a correlation between a team's points per game and offensive efficiency, offensive aptitude. However, if there was one school you'd look at nationally and say, perhaps points per game isn't a real good indicator of an offensive coordinator's success as a coach, it would be Iowa. Why do I say that? Because Iowa has had one of the most productive special teams units in the country under LeVar Woods. They've had one of the most productive defensive units in the country under Phil Parker. All right. I mean, just think about the individuals who've come out of those two units. I don't have to run through every guy on defense, but just look at special teams. You've got a freshman phenom kicker in Drew Stevens, who, by the way, was coming after an unbelievable stretch of kickers, guys who were money basically every time they set foot on the field. Miguel Racinos, Keith Duncan, Caleb Shudak. Torrey Taylor has been one of the best field position guys in the country. They have been terrific at punter since 2020 when he began here at Iowa. That does have a big correlation with points per game. I'll give you a perfect example. Iowa's opening game against South Dakota State this past season, they had one offensive score. And you could argue they had zero, right? Because the offensive score came from special teams. But of course, you're going to typically consider a field goal kick part of offensive scoring. But here's the deal. That one field goal that Iowa got in that game, that one offensive score came, of course, on the foot of Aaron Blom. It was a kick after a 5-yard drive. Field position, it covers a multitude of inadequacies on the offensive side of the ball. That's just one example. That's anecdotal evidence. But you go to the Rutgers game, Iowa scores 27 points. 14 of those points came from the Iowa defense. I mean, I understand that points per game is a metric, and I'm not saying it cannot be used, but it's a convenient statistic that does not tell the whole story, just like total offense does not tell the whole story of a game. I've had the apologists tell me, well, total offense is skewed because, of course, when the defense scores, it takes away from opportunities for Iowa to move the ball offensively. Iowa's ball control style of offense, you're going to run less plays and have less opportunity at big yardage. So there is not one perfect statistic. Yards per play is a good one. They were bad in every statistic last year. We understand that, right? They averaged 17 points per game on offense. They were second to last in FBS, 130th in the country in total offense. They were awful in red zone efficiency. They were awful in yards per play. So I'm not saying that 25 points per game wouldn't be an improvement, because it would likely indicate that the offense took a step forward. And I believe the offense will take a step forward. I've talked about that with Cade McNamara, Seth Anderson. I think they'll add another receiver in the portal for the spring. But to have the 25 points per game as the one real metric, like the one real stat that you look at to evaluate your offensive coordinator, to me is ludicrous, completely ludicrous. Again, just play theoretical here. Phil Parker comes out and his defense averages 8 points per game. All of a sudden, Brian Ferentz only has to average 17 points per game. That's a terrible number. That's a terrible number. And by the way, 25 points per game, which would be a big boost. Remember, that would be an 8 points per game boost from what they did this past season. That would have only ranked 85th in the country. That's the standard we're setting to get to 85th in the country in points per game, which, by the way, again, is a skewed number, is a skewed stat based on how much Iowa special teams and defensive units produce points. So that's the first DPO, if you will, designated performance objective. The second one that was mentioned, a minimum of 7 wins. A minimum of 7 wins. I had more people respond to me with this than the 25 points per game thing, because I mean, again, you understand 25 points per game is going to equal more wins. But for 7 wins to be the goal here, or a minimum of 7 wins, I mean, Iowa would have to have by their own standards, awful year on defense, awful year on special teams in 2023. The schedule is, I hate to say this, but it's weak. No Michigan, no Ohio State. The West is down. You've got Wisconsin rebuilding. You've got Nebraska rebuilding. You've got Purdue rebuilding. And that's 7 wins before a bowl game. So they can get to 6 wins, folks. They could potentially get to 6 wins, win the Quick Lane Bowl, get to 7 wins, and that DPO, that designated performance objective, would have been met, which, by the way, if you missed it, if Brian Ferentz meets those DPOs, 2 of which being points per game, 25 points per game, and 7 team wins, which again, Brian Ferentz is responsible for precisely 1/3 of those objectives. If you're looking at it quantifiably, then Brian Ferentz's pay goes to $925,000, which would be a boost of what he got last year at $900,000, and he would get a one-time $112,500 bonus. So, look, I don't really know what to say in response to this, other than if this was a legitimate attempt to quiet a fan base that's up in arms about Kirk Ferentz's denial with this offense, it was a really bad attempt. And at first I thought, this is just a big forget you to the entire fan base, right? This is Iowa's way of saying y'all don't matter. And as I said at the outset, it is true. Most of us who are talking don't matter, right? It's the big money donors that matter. It's the big money people that will really make a difference. Iowa's not going to go out in the field in early September with 50,000 fans in the stands. Iowa people, Iowa fans care way too much about football. They care way too much about their Saturdays and tailgating to not get that stadium mostly full. I'm not saying it'll be a sellout. I don't think they'll sell out every game like they did this year. But regardless of how you feel about Brian Ferentz, a lot of people will still go to the games because it's about the event. It's about the experience, which enables this situation. And the only people that really could do something about it would be the big money donors or potentially Barbara Wilson. And I don't see the president of the University of Iowa doing anything about this, probably because the money's there. And if the money's there, who cares, right? Unless there's something morally or ethically going on. And one could argue this is kind of an ethical issue. But regardless, I don't see that happening. But ultimately, I don't know if this is a big forget you to the fan base, or it's just another example of Gary Barta's inability to understand PR and his inability to negotiate a fair contract. I could very well see this just be a terrible attempt, very poor attempt at trying to quiet the Sharks, when in reality, it's only going to get those people more and more riled up. And I've already seen it on social media. But again, 7 wins, that's the standard, folks. 7 to 9 wins a year, minimum of 7 wins. That is the standard. That has been the standard under Kirk Ferentz. If you don't like it, hate to say it, it's too bad, because you're not the one with power unless you're one of the big money donors or a season ticket holder. And even then, you as an individual don't matter. It's you as a group, the season ticket holders as a whole, that have the power. But again, Saturdays in the fall just seem to be way too important to fans, and I can't really blame them for that. It's a special experience. It's a special environment, and Iowa football is a special thing. And I think that's why, if you look at this whole situation, why it's so frustrating to so many people, because they do realize the potential that's not being seen, that's not being realized because of an offense that's being held back by a dysfunctional situation involving Kirk Ferentz and his son, Brian. So we'll continue to talk about this. I look forward to having a discussion with Coach Don Patterson in a live show coming up. But we'll just continue to see what happens. We'll continue to give you coverage and, of course, post-game coverage for Iowa basketball. I'll remind you about that. I'll go live with Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. Central Time over at Iowa Football at the Voice of College Football. I'll throw that up in the card up here, right? A link to that channel, Iowa Football at the Voice of College Football, live 1-hour show, Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. Appreciate you tuning in for another segment, folks. A reminder to please hit that like button. Tell me what you think of the news today. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I'm skewing this in a negative direction, as some people have accused me of doing in the past. Let me know what you think in the comments. We'll talk to you soon.